Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special Nasher 360 event. I'm Curator of Education Anna Smith, and today we're happy to host a Modern Art Notes podcast conversation between Tyler Green and Sheila Hicks. If you made it into this room, you were surely greeted by the monumental work Hicks has installed in our lower level gallery. You'll find more of her work on view upstairs in Gallery 2, on the terrace, and in the Nasher Garden, all of which flirts with the boundaries of sculpture, textile, and painting, and is as multi-layered in its meaning as the fibers that make it up. Throughout her incredible 6-decade career, Sheila Hicks has exhibited internationally in both solo and group exhibitions. She was included in the 2017 Venice Biennale, the 2014 Whitney Biennial, and the 2012 Sao Paulo Biennial in Brazil. Her work has been the subject of recent solo presentations at the Centre Pompidou, Paris, Museo Amparo, Mexico, and at the Alison Jacques Gallery, London. A major retrospective of her work debuted at the Addison Gallery of American Art and traveled to the Institute of Contemporary Art, Philadelphia, and the Mint Museum in Charlotte. Hicks's work is held in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Stedelijk Museum, the Centre Pompidou, the Museum of Modern Art Tokyo, and Museo de Bellas Artes Santiago. After founding workshops in Mexico, Chile, and South Africa, and working in Morocco and India, Hicks now divides her time between her Paris studio and New York. In conversation with Hicks is Tyler Green, a historian and award-winning critic. Since 2011, he has produced and hosted the Modern Art Notes podcast, the foremost American audio program featuring artists, curators, and historians. The show has aired over 350 episodes and is in its 7th year. The BBC named the program one of the world's top 25 cultural podcasts. Green is also the author of Carlton Watkins' Making the West American. I'm going to turn things over to Tyler in just a moment, but please join me in giving a warm welcome to Sheila Hicks and Tyler Green.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Can we hear me okay? And Sheila, can we hear you okay? Can we hear Sheila? Oh, hi. Yes? Yeah, this is going to be our podcast for next Thursday. If you don't already subscribe or just Google Modern Art Notes podcast and we pop up, we're on iTunes and Stitcher and Spotify and Pandora. And all the usual places. This week's show is... We have one. But Sheila Hicks, welcome to the Modern Art Notes podcast. I want to start with something that's not in the show here in the Nasher, but that is foundational to your practice. Starting in, I think, the late 1950s, early 1960s, you started making a series of work you call Minimes. They're tiny, they're roughly and broadly speaking about the size of a hand, top to bottom, and width. And I think that there are hundreds of them, right? Thousands? Wow. The curator of the retrospective of yours at the Pompidou last year, Michael Gauthier, called them, I love this phrase, embryos of the creative process. How did you come to start them, and why are they important to you?
I'm not sure, but I think it began when you learned how to tie my shoes.
Oh.
What's your first contact with lines that are pliable, supple, and moving in space? When you learn how to walk and explore, and you come across lines, maybe they're electrical lines that are trailing from lamps, and you pull on them and see what they are and what happens. Maybe they're mops sitting in the corner that someone's cleaned the floor with. Look at lines that are moving in space. And as a child, I tried to follow those lines, and I've been doing that ever since. Those lines moving in space. And without getting electrocuted, sometimes touching them and realizing that the lines might even have tactile qualities, texture, the game gets really interesting. And if you sit on your grandpa's lap and he has a beard, and you touch it, it gets really interesting. All of these intermingled lines and threads and hair. And if they start combing your hair as it grows, and then they start to clean the brush after they've combed your hair, and they leave it on the table before they throw it away, which is kind of sad. You start thinking about that, and you start getting deeper and deeper into what becomes textiles, because you start getting dressed, and you start feeling and touching things. It can be handkerchiefs that they stuff in your pocket. Excuse me? When you're going to school, did they stuff a hanky in your pocket?
Yep, I remember that.
And you got very fond of that hanky?
And you remember how it felt, and there was like tactile memory.
And you used it, and it got even more tactile?
And there was that.
And then it rains and pours like today, and you run around grabbing things to put on because they have permeable, impermeable potential. All the story is getting complicated because now you're realizing you're enveloped by and dependent on daily, intensively on things that have to do with threads and yarns and lines and pliable umbrellas. Incredible. How can you not be aware? So that's where I got sort of lost in that trench or that ditch. And I've been squatting in that ditch ever since. Sorry.
No. So you started making the Minimes. It almost sounds like you're saying in part because they were so tactile and so.
Well, I didn't start calling them Minimes until I was maybe 50 years old.
Oh.
I mean, Minimes is a French word for meaning something small. And people, as I was making these little things, tchotchkes or whatever you want to call them, objects, and people asked me, why don't you show them? And that's kind of silly. So pin them on the wall or leave them on the table. And art critics, so dangerous, start giving them names. And they would call them miniatures or small works. Sound very pretentious. Small works, like you're going to an architecture meeting. And I had to I was in the foyer lobby waiting for my grandson's performance at school in Paris. And there was a word posted, something about Minimes. It was a word I wasn't familiar with, but it just stuck. I thought, that's it. That's the name of what I'm making. And it seemed appropriate.
So they're all about yay big, the size of a human hand, maybe a little bit wider, a little bit.
Size of this book.
Yeah, so why that size? What about that size has kept you engaged for so many years?
Because it fits on your lap, under your coat. You can hide it and take it with you. You can steal something when you're in a... Just slip it on your... under, your... And then when you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning because you're on jet lag, and rather than turn on the television and listen to things that cause you to have nightmares, you sit and fiddle with it, fiddle with whatever you've foraged during the day. And you can intricately construct things that could become as big as the Eiffel Tower. Because you start small. All the architecture in Dallas that we're surrounded by started with a sketch on a tablecloth by some architect, or some would-be architect, or some entrepreneur who decided he didn't need an architect. And he'd figure it out himself. And then when he went bankrupt, he'd start thinking, maybe I should have talked to an architect. So I sort of start small, and as I get older, I get braver, and I get invited to do impossible kind of adventurous things. Go to Dallas, Texas. We have a really nice garden right in the middle of all these glass monsters. And get close to the grass and figure it out, and maybe something will occur to you. That's why I'm here, at your invitation. Thank you.
So how often do you make Minimes now?
I'm doing them all the time.
Oh, all just constantly.
I noticed your shoelaces. And I'm walking around, look at her shoes right in the front row. We could take them and put them backwards and shove one inside. Can I borrow them?
Yeah, I should note for people who don't know the Minimes, often there is stuff within them. A piece of bone, for example.
Like someone, it's not easy in the rain to walk around with these. But I mean, they're kind of interesting because you might even put them together. You know? They're worn enough so they have a personality. You know, they're not out of North Park immediately. They've been worn. They've walked out in the mud and the rain, and they've had a life of their own for a few minutes, and now we're going to make them into art. And into sculpture, maybe. Right?
I like it.
Oldenburg should be here. Which side do you like best?
That one.
Now, the profile's great.
Oh. Well, if you'd like I feel like I should take off my shoelaces and provide them, but I will refrain.
Look at the soles.
I've been walking out in the rain.
Could be Japanese lacquer. When you go to Japan and you see the simplicity, which the Japanese are experts at trimming down and burrowing down into the essentials and doing beautiful lacquer work. There's some sculpture in your collection of that kind. So I'm doing them all the time. I'm thinking, that's the way I'm thinking. I'm a visual person, so don't take my words very seriously.
I'm always fascinated by artists who work at a range of scales. So the Minimes are small scale, and then obviously you work in a very large, often decorative scale. So let's talk a bit about your interest in decoration. And
I'm not interested in decoration.
The French decorative tradition, that doesn't interest you?
No.
No?
I'm interested in enhancing your environment in an exciting and passionate and beautiful and comforting way.
Regardless of what it's called or what art historical tradition it fits into.
Decoration sounds like a birthday cake.
Well, that's what I was that's why I brought it up, because there is this very American idea that decoration is to be resisted. You know, you have all of those Abex painters and macho videos.
Well, that's
getting
the fault of the Bauhaus.
Yes, I agree. I mean, absolutely.
So we're in the 100th anniversary, all praising the Bauhaus, who threw everything in the trash
This summer, yeah.
and trimmed down to 2 zeros, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so America has always resisted the idea of the decorative, but there was always a room in French or Austrian modernism. The decorative tradition was so strong in those countries that those modernisms embraced it, Matisse or Klimt. And I guess at some point, even though you had a Yale MFA background, you decided that the austerity and purity, air quotes, of modernism was to be rejected, and that you wanted to embrace the idea you just described of wanting to bring spirit and life to spaces. Was that a transition or a process, or did it just become evident to you as you played with materials, or kind of how did you get from Joseph and Annie Albers to...
How I got from Annie Albers was I took a bus. Because Joseph took me by force to his house to meet his wife.
Who was not on faculty at Yale, but who was...
No women
Right.
taught at Yale when I was at Yale. And they reluctantly let a few women into the school, into the drama school, into architecture. There were 2. So there were very few women. And so imagine how we dressed, not to call attention to ourselves. In 1954, I went to the Army surplus store. I put all my monogrammed sweaters in the closet. I didn't even have a closet, I had a rack. We didn't have dormitories. The women at Yale at that time had nothing. I dressed in Army surplus. I went to the classes not knowing what I was up for. I had never heard of the Bauhaus when I checked in.
Wow.
This is kind of stupid, isn't it?
No, this is great.
And I think young students today, everyone's writing them all the time. Where do you want to go to school? What do you want to study? They're supposed to figure all that out when they're only 17 or 18 or 19 years old. They're going to walk out in space and they're going to become the victims of chance. And I am primary example, victim of chance. I didn't know where I was going and what I was doing, but when I heard a German accent, because my grandfather reminded me of my grandfather, when I heard a German accent, I did what I was told to do. Did you?
I never heard German accents when I was a youngster in San Francisco. San Francisco was not full of Germans in the 1970s.
So they were speaking to you in British English?
Yeah, kind of with, a little West Coast drawl, dude. Like that way. Like a little surfer.
Okay. I lost the subject, to tell you the truth.
Well, we were talking about the large works you do, and one of a commission you fulfilled for a Gordon Bunshaft building in Dallas in the 1980s has been remade for a piece that's here at the Nasher. It's called Interchangeable Warp and Weft.
Do you know what warp and weft are?
Yeah, they're in weaving. No?
Which is the warp and which is the weft?
That's the part I don't know. So they're interchangeable because?
Danto, there's an art critic, Arthur Danto, who wrote a text about Greece and about how the Greeks dealt with weavers and weaving, which were used in this book. And the first meeting, he came, we had a meeting, and he said, okay, let's get down to the basics, the warp and the weft. I think I got it. I think I understand it. But what about this thing called the woof? You ever heard that word?
No, not only in relation to dogs.
Anybody know what the woof is? The warp. Anybody know what the warp is? Anybody know what the weft is? Okay, so now we're into Agnes Martin. We're sort of into the grid. You know, sort of the verticals and the interlacing horizontals. And maybe the woof is something in between, might start being the surface and the textures, the sort of, maybe we get to tufting, or maybe we get to knotting, or maybe we get to all these spin-offs of threads moving around doing acrobatically different things. He sorted out, and he quoted, and I'm picking this book up because if you don't mind, I'm going to pass it around.
Sure, let's do it.
So on that side, while we're talking, when you get bored, you can thumb through this. This is a book we published in 2005, Yale University Press. We're in the 5th printing because it helps people follow your line of questioning.
Well, while we're talking about the interchangeable warp and weft piece, one of the things...
Take a weaving and turn it sideways. All the medieval tapestries were woven sideways.
Ah.
And back to front.
That part I think I get.
Really complicated. Imagine all these battles and colossal unicorn tapestries and things. Think about how they made them. They're not made like painting, like a canvas that you approach and begin to paint, like Delacroix or someone else would paint. They're woven on usually either what they call upright, haute lisse or basse lisse, lisse being the warp, the lisse, and backwards with a cartoon, a gouache or a drawing or indications, numbered cartoons. We think in computer society right now that we're into digital. The weavers in the Middle Ages, in the Moyen Age, Middle Ages, we're using digital coding to weave tapestries, but by hand, of course. 113, 779, 12, 14, and then they would have all the threads and the colors labeled and grab the little, we're off into tapestry. A lot of people, when they start seeing what I do, immediately they want to talk about tapestry.
I believe it.
And you talk about décor and décoration. Well, what was the best and most appreciated and most used decoration in those periods?
Tapestry.
Tapestry. Huh? All of the chateaus, I mean, nobody had a decent chateau without tapestries. They were filled with, and of course rolled up, supple, rolled up, stored, rehung, fiesta, next, La Fête de la République, all the tapestries come out. And then, of course, all the banners come out. That's it. So this is an integral part of our opening the closet, getting dressed in the morning, and then sitting in an environment and enjoying being enveloped by stories that are told with thread and yarn.
Well, I think the material that interchangeable warp and weft is made from came from the Aubusson tapestry atelier in France, which has been around since the 16th century.
The studio that helped me weave those bands, of course, went bankrupt. Not because of my...
Your demands.
They ran out of orders because, the auditoriums that need acoustical properties, the glorious houses and estates that need to be enveloped in some kind of acoustical, beautiful, warm, environmental note of some kind, which I'm reluctant to call decoration, because decorators have a bad reputation. You get bills and bills and bills from decorators who are giving you advice, Right, Ben? Architect. No?
Well, interchangeable warp and weft and sentinel and saffron are both pieces that have taken other forms in other places. You've reused the material and remade them as new works.
These are bands. Thank God he stays on track. You see, these are bands, just woven bands with two finished salvages.
Yep.
And then with the warp threads, once the wefts have completed their passage, are tucked in and inserted back into the warp structure. So it's nice. It feels like four-sided salvage finish, but we're cheating. It's only two salvage finish. And then these bands can be interlaced, and they can go either way, and they're interchangeable. The bands can either become symbolically the warp, and we can insert the wefts, or vice versa. I made 6 or 8 panels out of these bands, and we installed them in this building over here that is now a landmark building in Dallas.
Gordon Bunshaft design.
It was a Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. It's one of your early
84, I think.
attractive skyscrapers that's become a kind of seedy-looking hotel right now. Right?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Well, when they transferred ownership, because even, can you imagine these skyscrapers transfer ownership or occupancy frequently? I never imagined that could happen. Once you build a building like a pyramid or a chateau, you don't imagine that 20 years later it's going to change occupancy and ownership. And you tear out the decor.
Which is so amazing to me that you fairly routinely get material back to do other things with.
Little did I imagine that I needed a loading dock. I didn't have a loading dock in my studio. I just have a simple studio in an old paved courtyard in Paris. We don't have a loading dock, but there are boxes coming and going of things made for certain places and coming back because those places are changing.
So was getting those boxes what gave you the idea, if you will, that it's perfectly fine, if not ideal, to reuse old works?
Isn't our whole necessity today learning about
upusing, if you will.
Upcycling?
Yeah.
Recycling, upcycling, and finding ways to use and not destroy things, especially if made by hand, if made with loving care by hand.
And we had images on a screen before we talked, and we'll have them on manpodcast.com, of Sentinel and Saffron as you installed it at the Pompidou last year, and as it is here at the Nasher in different forms. And upstairs here at the Nasher, in the show of works from the Nasher collection, you've included a gorgeous work by Richard Long. And I'm guessing that part of what you liked about that Richard Long is that is also made of a substance stone that is taken apart and re-put together every time it's installed.
No comment.
No? One of the other things I wanted to ask you about is the relationship between your work and faith traditions.
And what?
Faith traditions.
Fake?
Faith. Religious traditions.
Oh.
You've made a number of...
They're interchangeable sometimes.
I would agree.
How do you spell faith?
Faith.
And how do you spell fake?
Fake.
How'd they get so close?
I feel like I should be calling up the Oxford English Dictionary while we're sitting up here, and maybe we'd all learn something.
When you smile and speak, words get joined sometimes. And everyone ingratiates themselves by smiling when they're speaking to you. And I have such a hard time understanding what they're saying because I've lived for 50 years in Paris, and I only understand half of what's being said. And now I'm coming back into the States, and doing shows here, enjoying it. But I admit I only understand about half of what's being said.
How many languages do you speak now?
Half speak French, English, and Spanish.
It's pretty good.
And a few other odds and ends. But when people come up and start smiling and speaking to me, it's a big... Anyone else have that problem? Yes. Especially service staff, when you're in a restaurant or when you're in a public space or taxi drivers and things. Do you get it the first time? I thought I should attribute this to age. Getting on there and people think I'm hard of hearing or I'm not on the, But communication is tough and language is tough. And people usually don't even say what they mean.
We can all just go look at art. It doesn't talk except visually, which is great.
Louder?
That's why we have art. We can just communicate visually.
Art.
Yeah, we can just look and let things communicate that way rather than having to hear.
Except art's being invaded by the artists who want to do it audially. They want it to have sound. Bring sound. Is Venice Biennale? No? You've just come from Venice Biennale? How much of the Venice Biennale, normally or usually a visual art manifestation, how much of it is audio or video?
In this Biennale, probably 30%, I'd say.
30%?
Yeah, I'd say.
At least?
So at least, maybe more.
I wanted to ask you about your prayer rugs. In the
You see, we're back to faith and faith.
So in the mid-'60s, you made a series of works called prayer rugs, called Prayer Rug. You made a number of works called Ascension. Yesterday, when you and I were talking, you referred to one of the works here, the long-hanging white piece called Merrier. You referred to it as an Ascension.
Called what?
Merrier?
Menhir. It's in Breton. In Brittany, they have these standing stones, and they call them menhir.
But you also referred to it yesterday as an ascension, and this is a long way to my question, which is why in the 1960s and indeed since, at a time when artists weren't interested in making art that referenced faith traditions, were you interested in things like prayer rugs and ascension?
How can you eliminate someone like Rothko?
Well, but he was being maybe more metaphysical than specifically referencing a specific faith.
Wasn't he the son of a rabbi?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think of those, I don't know if I think of those as being particularly...
What about this chapel over in...
Houston.
Not spiritual?
Spiritual, but not a specific kind of spiritual, not specifically referring to Christianity.
Open-ended spiritual. Not a specific kind of, sort of open. That's the name of my show right now in Miami. It's called Campo Abierto, open field. It's a spiritual quest of open field. I'm trying to avoid speaking about politics, so I come at it diagonally or peripherally. But my work, a lot of people think is abstract. Did you think it was abstract?
I think there's abstraction there.
It's all representational in a very subtle way.
So
Ascension is exactly where I'm going. Hopefully.
So when we look at a work like Menhir here, and if we think of it as representational, is there one way to think of it? Or if we see a waterfall, for example, are we free to think of it that way?
Once more.
Well, if we see Menhir, if we think of it as representation,
And here is the white linen
Right.
column
hanging
in the
down.
first room here.
If we think of your work as representational, is there a specific way we should think of that work? Should we think of it as a waterfall? Should we think of it as
Not a specific way. I would say, campo abierto. Each person sitting here has the right, democratically, that's where we are, to think about it the way they want to think about it. I make things and then I add titles. I don't start with the title. I make something I feel and want to see. See is the important part. And after see, I want to see and feel. Feel meaning symbolically, I want to feel it. I want to feel connected to it. I want a certain dose of passion involved and certain dose of eagerness to communicate. And then the title comes later. And some people I know, each has their right to see and think and feel as they, and they shouldn't read too many art critics who tell them how to see. Don't you agree?
I do agree with that.
Because I mean, here you've got a bright fellow, but there are a few other characters wandering around out there that are misleading us. Wouldn't you say?
I think there's great fun in the open-endedness of looking at a work such as the one we're discussing and finding things in it and finding connections to art historical traditions. I mean, you have quite recently, last year in Belgium, hung a piece that hangs down or appears to hang down and flow over a body of water at the Horst Festival in Belgium.
Good for you. That's real research because Tyler.
And so I started thinking about those pieces in the context of water and waterfalls. And I don't know that I would have gotten there with those works until you installed them that way. And I guess I wonder if they live as waterfalls in your mind a little bit.
Anyone been out in the garden in the rain? Yeah. Out here? I did something I've never done before. So I'm still sort of puzzled about it and not quite sure about it. And it's bound to be a pain in the neck for the maintenance people here. And it has to do with taking soft lines of fabric and wrapping them in circular motions around the trees over on the right-hand side of the garden. It has something to do with waterfall. It's on the ground. And it's as though it's puddles where...
At the base of the trees.
At the base of the trees, puddles, but if it's there for 4 months, maybe the grass will grow in the interstice in between. The circular textile, sort of snail-like circles. I'm trying something out there, and the word you are asking about is ascension.
Yeah, that too.
Okay, we're on the ground. We're 8 years old, and we've got 20 other little kids with us who are 8 years old, and they're all walking along the path there. And they're going to see, what are they going to see first of all? Not the trees, not the sky. They're watching where they're walking. They're going to see something on the ground. They're going to be drawn over there to see by those trees. And they're going to see those trees are majestic, important. They're going to see those trees like no one has ever seen those trees before. Those trees are really special. And they're walking around and even walking in circles now around the trees. And then they look up. And so I'm pulling the vision. First of all, I'm grounded. That's where I am. We all are today, grounded. And we're spiraling up. So it's a grounded sculpture on the ground. Call it a sculpture? That's very daring to call that a sculpture. It's a discovery, if you please, of how to go up. Start by looking at the ground and where you are, figuring it out, enjoying it. Most of all, enjoying it. Go back to when you were very, very young and enjoy every day in the way you used to know how to do. And then move with it and keep moving, and you're going to hit the sky. You're going to see a few skyscrapers that look menacing, but you're under the trees and you're protected. And the reason you're protected is because you're in that magic circle.
That also sounds like it could be, so you've made a number of pieces in the last 20 years or so that both hang vertically, and then when they meet the ground, they flow horizontally. You know, they just have this big sweeping...
Gravity.
Yeah, and then, but not just the gravity, but you are happy for the pieces to lie on the ground and extend into the room 10 or 20 feet. And it sounds like you like for visitors to kind of think of those metaphorically, you know, that you approach something on the ground and then can go up, or your eyes can start up at the top and then come to where we are.
And then come down and get real. You know, we're walking in museums and looking at paintings that we're supposed to honor and obey on the walls. And then something comes down, hits the floor, and enters your domain. Be careful, don't step on it, and get real. And think about where you are and what you're doing. And then think, is this art? Keep asking yourself, is this art? And keep asking yourself, well, what is art? Have you figured it out?
Art can be a lot of things, depending on what the people who make it decide it's going to be.
Or the ones who receive it.
Yes, yes. You have worked, well, let's talk about the materials you use. You've used a little bit of everything over the years, a range of textiles, and you always have used a lot of materials. And I want to just throw out a couple of materials, and maybe you can tell.
Your feet getting cold.
Specific textile materials, and maybe you can tell us what you like about them, or what about them you find useful. So maybe one to start with would be silk. What about silk do you like? What does it provide to you?
How many you got on the list?
I'll do 4.
Which ones are your favorite ones?
Wool, linen, silk, and we'll do cotton.
Okay. Do you have an order?
Silk first.
And then?
Wool, linen, cotton.
I think North Park was built on a cotton plantation.
Field, yes.
Cotton field.
Yes.
Wasn't it?
Yes.
Built on a cotton plantation. I mean, we're all here thanks to that history. And the Mississippi and the whole region, cotton. Huh? But you want to talk about silk.
We'll get to cotton, but yeah, let's do silk first. What does silk do that you like? Why do you like using silk?
Where did you see silk in this exhibition?
I did not, but I know you've used it a lot, in the Minimes, for example.
So we're back to those little works, you know, in the book that's passing around. Did someone take it home? Okay. Okay. There's no silk in this show.
No.
We can talk about silk if you want to talk about silk. Do you have anything in your wardrobe made of silk?
I don't. That's probably part of why. Oh, I probably have ties that are made of silk. I probably have a necktie of silk.
Real silk?
Like some old family things, yeah.
You inherited?
Yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, it's kind of behind us now, silk. I think they should go home and Google silk. Because it's associations. Silk associations are the aristocracy, wealth, history, you know, the Orient, the Far East, the silk, the mythology and everything surrounding the silkworms and the cocoons. All this is exciting. But it hasn't got much to do with this show.
There's linen in this show.
There you go. There's lots of linen. And France is a linen producing country. Belgium, France, Italy, Chile. And I discovered linen. I didn't know linen as a living in the United States and going to school here. And then when I left, went to Latin America, fell more into the territory of llamas and guanacos and vicuñas, into the wool story in the Andes in Latin America. And then when I went to France and started living and working in France, I sort of discovered linen and really went for it, as you can see in this show. In the very big room where all of the other sculptures displayed, the one work that I show, the primary work in the one work I show is of linen.
Upstairs.
Upstairs. It looks so great on the travertine, is that marble wall in this museum? It has to stay here somehow. That's the thing I'll think about when I fall asleep on the plane this afternoon, is I'll think about that on that wall. It's in such good company, and it looks so beautiful there. Not just because I made it, you know, I'm very impartial. Back to linen. Linen is a beautiful material. It's dry. It behaves itself. It doesn't lose its personality. When you use it and work with it, it has a very, very strong personality. People don't like to wear it because it wrinkles. You sit in linen trousers, or you have a linen jacket or a linen shirt, you're reluctant to take it with you in your suitcase because you know it's going to be wrinkled. And you don't want to travel with or have to go someplace with an iron, right? So this thing about always having to be impeccable and no wrinkles and no creases, that's kind of sad, because if you take a piece of paper, which has sometimes cotton base, the book you're passing around is cotton fiber, the paper. But take a piece of paper and punch it.
Sorry.
We've got a few of these, so I'm going to... Okay. Okay. That's what happens when you do this sometimes to linen, and then you open it. If it's a woven linen, warp and weft, both linen, and then open it, and then it becomes a plane, but it has shadows, has creases. It has a real lively sort of surface, not like a flat painting that is stretched around wooden stretchers, you know. Oh, I've got linen right here. when you take this and stretch it around wooden stretchers, it's called taut. So now you're into the whole textile field about tension. Tension. So with linen, you can stretch it and make it. These could almost be like linen walls stretched on stretchers here. So linen, I really fell in love with when I got to France. And I bought, instead of ordering linen from suppliers, I would be visited by people who were selling rests, leftovers from, it's the fashion industry, which is very, very active in France. So suppliers and manufacturers would come and say, leftover from the last season, we've got all these samples of all these leftover materials. Do you want any of them? We'll give them to you for less than half price, or for practically nothing, because we got to get them out of the warehouse, to get ready for the next season. So I became part of the dumpster circuit. And I'd say, yes. And, well, we've only got 1 kilo of this color, but we got 3 kilos of this color, and we got half a kilo, I'll take it all. And then I started experimenting. That helps to experiment when you don't have prefixed ideas, when you just have availability of something. So you can then start to play with it freely, and it's not costing you a fortune because you haven't paid $17 a pound for. And that liberated me. Linen liberated me. And the eagerness of the suppliers of linen in France to get rid of their supplies and dump them in my studio helped me make a lot of new things.
And you've stuck with it all these years. You still
They
make...
keep at it.
But you could use anything you want practically now, but you still find...
I am a bargain hunter.
Ah.
I'm not going to go and order this extraordinary silk from Japan just because of its prestige. I'd like to use some available materials. Whenever I go to India, Morocco, or Peru, or somewhere, the first thing I look at are what are the obvious available materials in this place? And what are they making with it? And how can I maybe create my own creative input in some way? Can I work with them on what they have? That's what I did when you asked me about prayer rugs. Moroccan government asked me to come and look at their rug making sort of workshops and to introduce ideas because they were eager to export more rugs. And so I looked at what they had, what their materials were. They had cotton warp, usually, wool, knotting, and weft. And I made rugs, and then I made rugs I could hoist on the wall. And all of them for me were a whole series of prayer rugs. Because of the tradition, which I loved, when at a certain moment of the day, everyone would take off their shoes and go and kneel on a rug, hopefully pointing it toward Mecca. But they'd get confused, and sometimes it would be bedlam, the way the rugs were moving and pointing out. But they were all prayer rugs. And then it was nice, the idea of taking and looking at the architecture of all the arches in the way that Marrakesh, you've been to Morocco, some of you, so you know. Fez, Meknes, they took me around to all the rug making centers, the Ministry of Artisanat and the Ministry of Community Development. And I made ideas about rugs, and I called them prayer rugs. In a way, I was praying it was going to work.
Well, it did.
We don't have one in the show.
No.
Okay. But in the little book, there's some photographs.
Let me ask you another thing about the piece upstairs, the linen piece upstairs. there is a move that has been in your practice for a long time.
Wait a minute. We did cotton. We did silk. We did wool.
Wool.
And we did linen.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the piece upstairs, it has these strands of linen.
But you know what we forgot? Are you interested? Most of this show is made out of a synthetic material.
Yeah.
Have you noticed?
Yes, the big piece.
Everywhere. Outside. The things on the columns, out by the cafe and toward the garden. Those twisted vertical zips on the columns. The things that I mentioned of the escargot in the garden. This is a really interesting material. This is a material of our times. You might even be wearing some of that kind of material without realizing. The women are in their underwear, probably. And these are these new man-made industrial fibers and fabrics.
Where did you find them, or how did they come into your studio?
Well, they're in our existence. You can't, you go to North Park, about half of it's going to be synthetic fibers and fabrics in imaginative versions. You know, some of it looks like leather, some of it looks like blue jeans, some of it looks like blouses, some of it looks like wedding dresses. But it's our civilization. We are making man-made, synthetic, interesting, industrial, revolutionary kind of waterproof, lightweight, non-creasable kind of things. And who in art world is not using all these new things? Venice Biennale, you said it was 30% digital and...
Probably a bit more now in reflection.
How much synthetic was it with artificial and synthetic materials? 80%?
A little less, but a lot.
Might be that art is 80% where we're moving. You have an exhibition in the Annex Gallery upstairs? The first gallery you walk into upstairs? How much of it is made of synthetic and artificial materials? Maybe 80%? It's interesting. Let's conscious rise, huh?
Did you ever have to think about whether or not you wanted to use synthetic materials, or if you wanted to stick to natural materials?
That's a kind of backward way of thinking. I mean, are we going to live today, or are we going to live yesterday?
So it's a step toward modernity in the contemporary
Step
world.
toward actuality.
So I want to ask one more thing about the piece upstairs with the linen. And so the linen is tightly wrapped by these bands of color.
There are lines of color.
Yeah, that go around.
Of cotton, of embroidery cotton. And embroidery cotton that's used to embroider traditionally things like tablecloths.
Yeah.
Because then you can wash it and wash it and wash it, and the sun and the light don't damage.
So that is a move that's been in your repertoire for years, wrapping linen with cotton. So you have these very tightly controlled areas in these looser flowing areas of linen.
Reveal and camouflage. Reveal and camouflage.
So where does that come from? The natural world?
From life. Women are very covert.
You once called works with the linen bound with cotton lians.
I didn't have any way of knowing what they should be called, and so people just walking into the studio would say, "Can you make me a wall of?" And they were searching for the word. What's the word? Right, Frank? So what are they going to call those things? Did you invent the word?
Because
It's in French. It means?
well, it's a kind of tree that are these vines that grow from the ground up into trees that are kind of I don't know, about the same width and circumference as the works you made. And so I thought maybe your use of the word lian might have come from.
Must be from the associations that people have when they walk in my studio and see us making. They're coming maybe from their chateau or their garden or their... People give names to my things. And I don't usually until I'm finished with whatever I'm doing. But you like the word?
I think it's a great word, and because I know virtually no French. I mean, I have vaguely art historical French, right? I can understand, I can read painting titles, and that's about it. But so when I tried to find out what a lian was, the first thing that comes up when you look at Google are these reedy, thick, woody vines. And it made me think that maybe those forms you borrowed from nature, directly from nature.
I think people's imaginations it was gift by association, where people started calling them these things. But you see, here in America, they like it in the gallery circuit and to something that sounds vaguely French, like in restaurants. So it works. And if you call them woody, reedy, kind of woodsy, I don't think they'd order it in the restaurant.
The last thing I want to ask you about is a work over here in the lower gallery called To Take Roots. It's a canvas which has been diagonally wrapped.
Actually, the title is in the original title, I have to tell you right away, on that same subject, not to lose that idea of titles. Corde Sauvage. They're called, the title and the reference we always use in my studio, and ever since I've been making them, is Corde Sauvage. Cord, just a cord. Gone crazy, sort of sauvage. Savage. The savage chords. And my grandson loves to come and work on them.
Oh.
And he comes and helps and sits there at the table and tells us his adventures, who he's flirting with, that he's 12. And he likes to integrate in the studio and talk to some of the young girls who are doing apprenticeship or something at the studio. And he wants to come over and wants to know, this week, anybody up to making Corde Sauvage? He'll wander over on his Wednesday afternoon. So we call them Corde Sauvage. And they're endless. We love making them.
I can see why. They're playful and gorgeous.
And you're calling them?
Well, I think the specific title of this one was To Take Roots.
Okay, so that seemed like a nice one. We put it in an art fair, right?
Yes.
We put it in an art fair in FIAC?
Basel, Miami.
Basel, Miami, and FIAC. And most of the visitors were American.
Yes.
They didn't. I think maybe they thought it was creepy to have these Corde Sauvage. If you have it in a gallery, they want to sell it. So put on a title that's not going to make people feel like it's creepy.
Well, it's a nice title too. Because the roots of that object are the canvas underneath the wrapping.
There's no canvas. What canvas?
You can see some canvas peeking out from
You
underneath.
see everything peeking out.
Yeah.
Look in there. You've got all kinds of things. You've got all kinds of things inside.
And I wanted to ask about that peeking out. What about?
Now you see it. Now you don't.
Yeah. Is that why?
Now you want to touch it.
There's
Now
that
you want
there.
to figure out what it is. So if they would, we're nearing the end, right?
Yeah.
The people who were brave enough to come out today in the rain and who are here, would the museum allow them to touch the Corde Sauvage if they wanted to in the first gallery out here? Because it's really a kick.
Is John Chabru in the house?
I have to tell a story from, so Sheila was on the podcast about 5 years ago, and she told a story about how, obviously people aren't supposed to touch the art, when you see sculptures and stuff, but that one of the things you liked about bronze sculptures that were old was that you could see the history of how people had tactily interacted with them on the surface of the sculpture, that you could see, with a 200-year-old sculpture in a park in France, what people had been drawn to. And that helped make the old thing contemporary and tactile and revealed something about humans, too.
I'm sort of like that. I've been touched.
That's probably a good place to stop. Sheila Hicks, thank you.
We're allowed to have fun, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah,
No.
people have questions. We're going to have a microphone. Raise your hand, and we'll bring the microphone to you.
You just identify who you want.
Yeah, maybe right there.
Hi, I'm also from Nebraska, from a town very close to where you're from.
What's it
And
called?
Columbus. So I am very curious because when you went to college at Yale, it was really unheard of for young women to go to Yale. I was really happy to go to the University of Nebraska. I'm just curious, if you could talk about how you launched from Nebraska to Yale at that time.
Very devious route. You see, the mythology is I come from Nebraska. Well, it's true in a way. I come from, but I didn't spend that much time in Nebraska. It explains it in there's a few monographs and books, so I won't bore you with my biography. But my grandfather asked his children, whenever they were giving birth, his daughters, to come back and birth in Nebraska. Because they were amongst the founders of Hastings.
Oh, really?
And the idea being you wander as you will, and curiosity as you will. Because I have cousins, who became doctors and lawyers and all kinds of things, but they all did it out in other territories. But all of the children and all the cousins and everyone have a link to Hastings. So I have this mythological, wonderful link to Hastings, Nebraska. And there's even someone I met here, also from Hastings, right? From Hastings? He asked me if my grandfather was a mason in Hastings, a Shriner or something like that. So how to get from Hastings to Yale? Let's go with the short path, quick cut. When my mother and father graduated from Hastings College, they eloped and took off and became Bonnie and Clyde and traveled throughout the Midwest. He seeking employment. He got employed by someone who wanted him to establish branch offices of a certain ball and roller bearing kind of company. And so he moved and opened offices all throughout different cities. And I say as a joke, my brother and I learned to entertain ourselves playing games in the back seat of the car because we moved from different places during the Depression. During Detroit, he worked with the Army Ordnance, specialized in ball and roller bearings. So in Detroit, I was there during the war, right? Go fast. As soon as that was over, we moved to Chicago. And I went to high school on the North Shore of Chicago. And then I went because I fell in love with a guy who recruited students for college. I fell in love with a guy who came to our high school who looked like Cary Grant. And he was... True story. And nobody wanted to go to his school. It was college day where they're trying to get, I told you, young kid, you're 17, 18, 19. Where are you going to go to school? What are you going to study? I had two very serious brothers, who went to bona fide legitimate colleges. This guy convinced me to come with another friend. We wanted to study art, we thought, to his school, which was Syracuse University. There we met a Yugoslavian sculptor called Mastrovic. Ever heard of him?
No.
Have you ever been to Chicago and seen all of the bareback Indian riders, all these huge sculptures along Lake Michigan? You know, it's the most important sculpture in Chicago. Are all these bareback Peau Rouge Indian riders. Very powerful. And he had a big studio at Syracuse, and he was a sculptor, and we were fascinated, this other friend and I, with this man's work. And we studied art at Syracuse for 2 years. Until one day she said, "The dean is leaving, the guy who's our protector. I'm going home for spring vacation. Let's look at," it was another student, a person I spent a lot of time with. We were making prints, lithographs, woodcuts, engravings. "Give me your portfolio of prints." She had hers. "Give me yours too. I'm going to scout another school in case we don't like the new dean coming into this school and we don't like the atmosphere and we're not happy." What was there to lose? I gave her my portfolio. She took off for spring vacation. And she came back, and you know what she told me? "If we don't like it here, we've got a choice." I took our portfolios to Yale. I met with the director. He's a German. He's kind of fearsome. But he accepted both of us, the portfolios, and gave us advanced standing on the basis of these prints we were making and drawings. Now, that's a happy story, except she committed suicide that summer. So you see how life turns. And my father said, "What do you do now, smarty? You're going to go back to school where you know and what's going on at Syracuse, or you're going to go someplace where you don't know anybody and you don't know anything?" I've said, "I'm going where I don't know anything, because I don't want to go back to Syracuse, and I don't want people asking, whatever happened to that friend of yours?" So I ran away from Syracuse, went to Yale, and there I was. Destiny was, that's how I got to Yale. I wasn't a brave woman, brilliant, applying to one of these good schools. I might mention, I had a brother at Princeton. He was pretty embarrassed.
Over here?
He refused to come and visit me, even when they had the football games, and I don't know what. He wasn't going to say he had a sister hiding in the art school in Yale, We had a very sort of life apart at this little art school at Yale. Nobody took us seriously. None of the Yaleys. Not the medical school, not the law school. None of the schools took us seriously. But watch out, because the story has a happy ending. I'm sorry to introduce a sad note, but it's sort of part of the whole ensemble of what goes on. We have up days, we have down days. We have sunshine, we have rain.
I have another Nebraska question. There was a great writer from Nebraska named Marie Sandos. She wrote Old Jewels, big phenomenon in the 1930s, lived until the mid-1960s. I'm not asking if you ever crossed paths with her, but did her work inspire or influence or affect you in any way?
Since you're into literature, you know Willa Cather. Well, my grandfather's sister, my great aunt, was friends with her. And I believe she probably inspired me, because they would put Giants on the Earth and all kinds of books on my table all the time. I read Willa Cather very early on, a lot. She's a kind of adopted Nebraskan. But Sandos, no. I didn't.
Thank you.
I didn't know.
Lee?
Sheila, I was wondering if you have given a title to the work you've done in the garden and on the terrace?
Because you have to write the caption.
That's right.
We have had such a good time. Well, I have had such a good time working with Lee. Will you stand up? Because she's been the wheels on the coach that made the car run, of making this exhibition happen, of following it from beginning to end. So you want to put the last dot on the last I of the legend, the caption for that. Let's go out there and take a look at it, and we'll do it. It'll be fun. A nice way to finish.
And that's probably a good place to finish. Sheila Hicks, thank you.